first of all, for stealing my entire introduction. So I'll dive straight into the conversations because we have a very limited amount of time available. All I would say is that this book, How India Scaled Mount G20, is the story of how a nation, once dismissed as a sleeping elephant, rose to lead the world stage, offering solutions, forging alliances, and building a lasting legacy that reflected the aspirations of both the developed and the developing worlds. So it is both an honor and a privilege for me to moderate a session bringing together India's G20 Sherpa and two ambassadors who played crucial roles in shaping the global dialogue during India's G20 presidency. The ambassador of Australia, representing a close strategic partner, and the ambassador of Norway, exemplifying a nation committed to sustainability and global cooperation, bring unique perspectives to this conversation. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Mr. Amitabh Kant, His Excellency Philip Green, and Her Excellency May-Elin Stener. Thank you for joining us today. And let me begin with the author himself. Now, India's G20 presidency has been described as transformational, not just for the outcomes it achieved, but for the inclusive and human-centric approach it championed. In your view, what were the defining moments or strategies that set India's presidency apart from any other G20 presidency previously?
Thanks, Vikas. First and foremost, when India took over the presidency, there were several challenges. There was a raging war in the heart of Europe. This was the post-COVID era. Vast segment of population across the world had fallen below the poverty line. Large number of people had lost their jobs. Only 12% of the sustainable development goals were on track. There was a huge challenge of climate action and climate finance. And, we just seen a divided house on geopolitics in Bali, and all through the year, all our ministerials had actually failed. We'd attempted our best, but all the ministerials had failed. And everyone across the world felt that it was not possible for India to arrive at a consensus. Now, in multilateral forums, consensus is necessary, because if even one country opposes it, that particular issue or the declaration falls apart. Now, when leaders are coming and you are not able to arrive at a consensus, your country's prestige is very, very important. And if you're not able to achieve consensus, then it radically impacts your credibility in the world of diplomacy. And the Prime Minister wanted India to be very ambitious. He wanted India to be decisive. He wanted India to be very action-oriented. He wanted India to be inclusive. Now, the job of a Sherpa, and I was a Sherpa, and the job of a Sherpa is to take his leader on top of the Mount Everest, make him succeed. Secondly, the Prime Minister also wanted India to do the G20 very differently from other nations. He wanted India to host the G20 in every single state and every single union territory of India. Normally, in every other country, the G20 is held in one or maximum 2 or 3 cities. Now, to do 230 meetings in all the states and union territory, was including Andaman, Lakshadweep, Arunachal Pradesh, Kashmir, was one hell of a challenge. So to pull that bit out on logistics, to be able to be inclusive, to be very action-oriented, and to get a consensus of G7, to get a consensus from the global south, to get a consensus from Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Australia, all these countries, was a very challenging task. And to get it in issues of balanced, sustainable, inclusive growth, on issues of Green Development Pact, on digital transformation, and on women-led development was one hell of a task. And that is what India achieved.
Hi, Commissioner Green. Now, Australia has emerged as one of India's closest partners in recent years. From your perspective, what were the key lessons from India's G20 presidency that stand out as valuable opportunities to shape the future of bilateral cooperation between India and Australia?
Let me paint this on the broad canvas that it deserves. One of the key developments of our time is the emergence of India as a major player in global affairs. And that has been coming for a long time, and it's got a way to go. But for all of these major global events, there is often a talismanic moment, a particular event or activity that causes everybody to say, yeah, that thing is real and it's got a long way to go. And for me, that was the G20. It galvanized India's reputation as a global great player in global affairs. And this was tough. So, the geopolitical chapter or paragraphs of the communique which Amitabh talked about, others had failed, and frankly, people in my system didn't think India would make it, but you did. And it was dramatic. So my country's name starts with an A, so that means I speak relatively early, and I think it was after Argentina, and Argentina would never say anything about Ukraine, so it fell to me to be the first one to say something about Ukraine, and you could feel the tension in the air. What's he going to say? How tough is it going to be? And then we went around the room. You guys had all of that tension in spades because you had to bring it all together. My advice to everyone is buy the book, read chapter 5. Read chapter 5 on the geopolitical text. It is, well, let me say one final thing about India's and Amitabh's diplomacy. It was sophisticated and deft, as you would expect from India, but there were moments where it was tough. And we didn't feel that toughness because we were always with you, Amitabh, but there are moments, and you'll read about them in chapter 5, where India put its foot down and held its ground when things were tough and succeeded.
Ambassador, now Norway is not a member of the G20, but I believe Norway was invited as a guest country at the Rio G20, or Prime Minister attended it. So I'm curious to know, what is the Nordic perspective on the G20?
Well, I can only speak for Norway. I'm only authorized for that, but probably the other Nordics also would agree. And the headline is G20 is important. It's important for us. It's the countries of G20, they represent 85% of global GDP, 75% of global trade. So this is the most important place for discussions about global economy, that's for sure. Norway is a mid-sized economy. We are about number 32, but together the Nordics are number 11 as an economy. So of course for us it's important also to see to this venue for what is happening. And G20 is a multilateral arena that is, like other multilaterals, important, and it's a key tool for ensuring global solutions to global problems. We are very happy that we were invited by Brazil and now by South Africa to be a guest member. So effectively that means for everyone here that we are participating as members now for two years. We believe that that's also a testament to how we have worked multilaterally, and that also the G20 countries think that we can contribute to this, and we will be part of it, and we will cooperate to this end in a world that now this is more needed than ever.
Thank you. As High Commissioner Green mentioned, there were moments, in fact not just moments, I thought there was a general consensus that India would not be able to produce a joint statement. Because as you mentioned, all the previous meetings before that, the foreign ministers meeting, the development ministers meeting, the finance ministers meetings, had failed to produce a consensus document. So were there any moments when you really felt that, caught between the G7 on the one side, Russia and China on the other, that you are caught really between an immovable force and an unstoppable, an immovable object and an unstoppable force, and that this is impossible. So what were the strategies that actually led to the signing of the joint statement? What were the tactics that eventually forced this joint statement to be produced like a, rabbit out of a hat?
So Vikas, one thing was very clear that, the climate paras had failed. Energy paras had failed. Geopolitics, we were failing. We just had about 12 days left. So first of all, we said that the Sherpa meeting will not be held in Delhi. We took a call that we'll take everybody out to ITC Grand, which is in Noor district of Haryana, about 75 kilometers away. That was just to ensure that there is no media can get in. And we closed the hotel. We said no media will be allowed. And we started the process of negotiations. So 20 Sherpas sitting around, 20 screens, one computer, only one computer. No computer was allowed, no mobile was allowed. Because any leakage of communique would have just wrecked the entire process of negotiations. We started with the geopolitical para. I gave out the first draft because we failed all through the year. I took out the first draft and we started the process of negotiations. Let me tell you this, that we did, on that one single para, we did about close to 310 hours of negotiations. 250 bilaterals we did. 16 drafts failed. We were absolutely sure we were heading for a failure. I was sending a situation report to the Prime Minister every 2 hours. Not once did he ever ask me anything. He said, it's your job to ensure a consensus. He had full faith. 17th draft, we finally said, by that time I knew everybody is redlined. We drafted out the final draft. The great thing that we were doing is that we were keeping Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia with us, 4 Sherpas together negotiating. I had the Global South with me. And when I went into the final round on 17th, that was 1 o'clock in the night. The leaders had already come in. By that time, none of the Sherpas had been given any paper at all. All Sherpas were complaining, but at 1 o'clock, I finally put the final draft. And I said, I know everybody is redlined. This is the final draft. My leader has seen it. The Brazilian Sherpa said his leader has seen it. The South African Sherpa said his leader has seen it. So did the Indonesian. And I said that my Prime Minister has asked me to tell you that if we do not get a consensus on this, then India will walk out of G20, we'll work with BRIC, we'll work with IPSA, but we'll not work with BRIC because it's the responsibility of every single country to bring a consensus. And I said, this is the final draft, you take it or you leave it. And I want a consensus on this by 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, all the Global South supported us. Saudi Arabia, Argentina, Mexico, all of them supported us. By 4 o'clock in the morning, this was happening at about 1:30. I came back to my room. As soon as I came back to my room, the Russian minister walked in with the Russian Sherpa, and he said that this draft is not acceptable to us. I said, why? He said that we want a line against the sanctions imposed on us. That line must be there. I knew that was a red line for the G7. They will never accept it. So I said, that is not possible. And G7 will never accept it. That is not possible. He kept arguing with me. And finally, we had to tell him, and I got in touch with External Affairs Minister, and then I told him that if you do not accept it, the next speaker after the Prime Minister will be Zelensky. The G7 was insisting on Zelensky to speak. He'd spoken at Bali. Instead of 3 minutes, he went on speaking for 35 minutes. And I said, the next speaker will be Zelensky. He'll speak after our Prime Minister. Within 15 minutes of that, we got a yes from Russia. So by 4 p.m., I had the consent of all G7 except the United States of America. At 8 a.m., the Prime Minister was to come to Bharat Mandapam. Prime Minister, and I was there, EM was there, everyone was there. So PM asked me, तो बताइए अमिताभ जी क्या किया आपने, कुछ consensus वगैरह की? So I said, no. I said, have you achieved consensus? So I said, no sir, we are still at it. So I started telling him what the challenge was. So PM looked at me and he said, don't tell me procedures, don't tell me processes, you achieve consensus. He was very clear, he didn't want to get into anything. And he said, you achieve consensus. So Prime Minister went at 8 o'clock. 8:30, I phoned up the American Sherpa, Mike Pyle, and Mike Pyle told me that, give me 15 minutes, Amitabh, I have yet to discuss with President Biden. He called me back after 15 minutes. He said, I've discussed with President Biden. We'll agree to this draft, but we have two conditions. I said, what are the two conditions? He said, we want a change in one word. Now that shows that multilateral negotiation, every letter, every word matters. Every word matters. And he said, we want a change in one word. And secondly, we want a yes from Russia and China beforehand. Now Russia, we already had consent in the night. China, we didn't have. So I then phoned up the Chinese Sherpa. And the Chinese Sherpa said to me that, Mr. Kant, since the Global South is all with you, we will not go against Global South. We agree with this draft, but we have one condition. I said, what is that condition? He said that my Prime Minister who has come said that we want to remove one line which has already been agreed upon. I said, what is that? He said that the United States will hold the G20 in 2026, which was very important for USA because President Biden was to contest the election. He said, remove that line. I got back to the US. US said, nothing doing. This is agreed by everybody, no question. So finally, I had to sit. The leaders' meeting started at 9 o'clock. 9:30 to 12:30, I sat with the American Sherpa and the Chinese Sherpa. And the Chinese Sherpa insisted that the American must give a written guarantee. And I had to tell the Chinese that I'm a native English speaker. You guys don't know how to speak English. And the word ensure is better than taking a guarantee. And finally, we had, after 3.5 hours of negotiations, the Americans just gave, and the Chinese said that since we'll go by what Indians are saying, finally we got them a letter saying that we'll ensure, because the Chinese were saying these guys don't give us visas. They will not give visas for a Hong Kong governor, etc. So finally, we got them a letter saying that Americans will ensure that visas will be issued. And a bilateral issue was sorted out on a multilateral forum. And by 1 o'clock, we got the agreement. And 1:30, the Prime Minister announced that the consensus is there. And that's how we clinched it. So at least 16 times I felt that we'll never be able to reach on top of the Mount Everest.
After hearing this, my next thriller is going to be on the G20. High Commissioner Green. Now, one of the most unique aspects of India's G20 presidency was that we transformed it into a people's G20, taking it to 60 cities and reaching a combined population of 233 million. Now, what is your view on these kinds of efforts? How important are they to foster global cooperation?
Well, let me channel my staff for a moment and say what they would say about those 60 different venues was it was exhausting. I mean, as Amitabh has said, normally you have 1, 2, 3, or maybe 4 venues. 60, so that's 60 times a security detail, 60 times checking out the venue, 60 times working out all the different protocol arrangements. It was mad, but it was super in the end.
And did you end up with 60 turbans from the different states?
Yes, I definitely got 60 turbans. No, look, I think what was crucial about all of that was that it brought the message about the G20 to a vast group of the Indian population. Just as I said, this was a talismanic event for the world understanding that India had arrived. I think it was a talismanic event for Indians to understand that India arrived, to have faith, to have pride in what their government was achieving. So for me, that was what that People's G20 was about.
Ambassador May-Elin, now, one of the big outcomes of the G20 was the para on climate change, on green sustainable development. Norway has been a consistent leader in these fields. What did you make of India's achievement in getting that para out?
Well, let me first say, and I was also an outsider. I'm an outsider here, like everyone else, and we really are enjoying listening to you, Amitabh, on the work that you did. The Indian presidency was an impressive show of diplomacy, and this is showing. You are showing it here, and that is important for the climate change agenda, of course. I would also like to mention that this taking G20 and foreign policy out to the people, like you did, is also important for climate change and making sure that everyone is on board. Because climate change is a global challenge, and it therefore needs a global response, and it needs a global response supported by the people. And the theme that you chose, Vasudev Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, one future, really highlights that this is key to sustainable development and green transition. So you were really showing that you wanted to strengthen the multilateral agreements and the platforms to promote international dialogue and on these issues. These issues where we need higher ambition, faster pace, if we are going to be able to tackle it. You had a whole of government approach that was really important. And let me also just say from the Norwegian perspective, we are an ocean nation. You, as a G20 presidency, India put an emphasis on blue economy, which is crucial for our planet, and it's very important for Norway. And we are really enjoying working with you on that, and will continue also long after the presidency.
Now, back to Mr. Amitabh Kant. Prime Minister had made a promise long time back that he wanted Africa to also enter the G20, and he finally succeeded in making the African Union the 21st member of the G20. I don't know whether it will become G21 now, I don't know. How difficult was that? I mean, was it as difficult as that Russia-Ukraine paragraph? Tell us what went on behind the scenes to get the African Union admitted.
Vikas, I just wanted to just respond to the question that you had asked Philip on, hosting it in different parts of India. So, the Prime Minister was very clear that make G20 a people's movement. Take it to schools, take it to colleges, take it to every state. And, so one of the things we did was that we said every state will do its own culture. The cultural arrangements were all done by the states. So they showed their traditional folk art forms, their classical art forms. The cuisine was all local, and the gifts that we gave were all one district, one product. So all from that respective state. And since the Chief Secretary of Rajasthan, Mr. Pant, is sitting here, let me say that the best G20 was held in Udaipur, in Rajasthan. It was just spectacular. That was the first Sherpa meeting. It was just so spectacular that it set the mood for the remaining G20s. And, so to my mind, G20 is the best example of cooperative federalism in India. Every state, every union territory came together. On the issue of, South Africa becoming African Union becoming a member, let me go back to Bali. And when the Bali declaration was to be done, the Senegal president, Macky Sall, he actually walked up the final day when the declaration was to be announced. African Union was an invitee only. He walked up to the Indonesian president and almost warned him that you failed in your G20, almost threatened him, saying that you have failed in your G20 because you've not been fair to the African Union. And then he walked up to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister almost gave him, heard him out, and he said that we'll do our best during our presidency. It was almost like a Modi ki guarantee. And then when we started doing our presidency, the PM was very clear that make it more inclusive. And by inclusive, that G20 was just about 70% of the global GDP, make it 84% of the global GDP by including African Union. And African Union was important because according to IMF, 2/3 of the global growth is coming from Asia and Africa. It's not coming from, only 1/3 of the growth is coming from the developed part of the world. And for the next 3 decades, most of the growth will come from Africa and from Asia, because the demographics of Asia and Africa are young. The European part of the world, the American part of the world is aging. And therefore, by including these countries, you'll make it more inclusive. So we got the Prime Minister to write to all the leaders, and then we finally had to discuss it in G20. We had challenged because some countries said that ASEAN has to be a member. Some countries said that the grouping of the southern nations, Mercosur, has to be a member. It was debated, discussed, and finally we had to tell them that much like European Union, African Union is a formal body, unlike ASEAN. ASEAN is not a structured formal body, nor is Mercosur. And therefore we went ahead and eventually we were able to do a lot of backhand diplomatic negotiations and get everybody together. So India spoke the voice of the Global South. We had several meetings of the Global South, and this is the first time that if you read the declaration, you know, the normal drafting of declarations is done by all developed countries. This declaration, the language is of the Global South. The pen used is the language. The voice and the pen is that of the Global South.
Absolutely. High Commissioner Green, now today we all woke up to the news that President Trump has imposed 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, 10% on China, and he is threatening tariffs on many other countries in the world, including Denmark and whatnot. The WTO's dispute settlement mechanism is already defunct. In the context of G20, how can India and Australia work together towards a more equitable global economic order, a more rules-based economic order?
Well, I think we're very well placed. The only minilateral meeting that was held on the sidelines of President Trump's inauguration was the Quad meeting, where Dr. Jaishankar and Penny Wong and Japanese counterpart were there. So each of us, both India and Australia, have a direct line of engagement with President Trump, and we will be using that for the most that we possibly can. Look, for us, a free and transparent and rules-based trading system, and a fair one, are key requirements of the global order. And so we will continue to press ahead with all of the efforts that we have always done to support that, understanding, however, that there are imperfections in the WTO order. Imperfections that some are now pointing out, and that we need to be more active in trying to resolve. But also, this will take creative diplomacy. And Vikas, you mentioned the fact that the formal mechanism of appealing in the WTO system is defunct. That's true, but that's why Australia and a group of other countries have put together a de facto appellate mechanism, which is working. Not perfect, not ideal, but we are still able to run the WTO disputes mechanisms process.
Ambassador May-Elin, now India's stewardship of the G20 was also remarkable for promoting gender equality and women-led development. In fact, we created the Women's Empowerment Working Group. So how important it is for global forums like the G20 to integrate gender perspectives into policy discussions?
Well, that's crucial, and congratulations again to India for doing that. Also for Norway, gender equality is the core of our foreign policy. We still base ourselves on the Beijing platform from 1995 as the best standard for women's rights. And this we also want to work for internationally. It's the best basis, best condition for development and peace. So India did very big and good push for that during the G20 presidency. We would also there like to continue working with India. We do that quite a lot as Norway. We have a program actually where we take Indian MPs to Norway together with the UN Women organization and talk about the experiences that we have had in Norway, and it has got quite a lot of interest also here in India. We also, of course, have a lot to learn from you, and I think that also has to do with how you can take this agenda of gender equality into the global scene, into the international negotiations. As a big country, we would like to work with you on that. We are seeing also pushbacks in the United Nations when it comes to normative standards on gender equality. And this we have to work on together, and we would like to do that continuously with India.
Thank you. For my last question, Mr. Kant, now India's digital public infrastructure has been hailed as a transformative model for the global south, achieving in a decade what others took half a century to achieve. So, putting on your earlier Niti Aayog hat, what were the key factors that enabled this rapid success, and how did India leverage its G20 presidency to promote a collaborative, inclusive vision of digital transformation on the global stage?
So, Vikas, I think that's a very important question, because if you look at the last 2 decades, all big tech companies in the western part of the world, Google, Meta, Amazon, they have brought in all the technological advancement in the world. And in China, it's Tencent and Alibaba. India built up an alternative model where we created a digital identity for 1.4 billion people, on top of which we allowed private sector to compete. So India is the only country where PhonePe competes with Google Pay, Paytm competes with Amazon Pay, etc. But we do, between 2015 to 2017, we opened 550 million bank accounts. And then we seeded both the identity and the mobile number. We do 50% of the real-time fast payments in the world. We do credit, we do insurance, we do stock market transactions, all in 30 seconds to 1 minute, on the mobile, on the go. In the western part of the world, all the data that, when you access Facebook or when you get onto Google, all the data belongs to the service provider. In India, we have a digital empowerment protection architecture where the data belongs to the citizen. The data cannot be memorized by the service provider. That is what is unique in India. So this is the model. So during every meeting of G20, we propagated digital public infrastructure, that during COVID, we could give vaccination to 2.2 billion COVID vaccination we gave, which was paperless, cashless. In United States of America, it was all paper. We take a cab, we use our mobile, we pay through PhonePe. In United States, when I went to visit my daughter in San Francisco, I had to use my credit card, which I have not used for four years. So India is very different. We have technologically leapfrogged. And to my mind, if you want to improve, the Bank of International Settlement said that what India has achieved in 7 years would have normally taken India 50 years to achieve. 7 years of progress, what would have taken India 50 years? So we said, if you want to transform global south, this is the way. The digital public infrastructure is the way, not the big tech way of the Western world. And that definition of digital public infrastructure, the principles of it were accepted, and this G20 has enabled digital public infrastructure to become a global good by which we can transform the lives of people in global south now. Thank you.
Absolutely. I believe UPI is now accepted in Singapore and France and countries like that. So I think this is the time for me to open it up to the audience. I don't have time for more than a couple of questions, but I want the questions to be absolutely unique, very short and succinct. Okay, this lady here in the pink, in the front. I can see you, yes.
Hi, thank you for such an insightful conversation. I guess my question is to both High Commissioner Green as well as Mr. Kant. I guess I'm very curious to know about the challenges that we faced while hosting the G20 summit and the lessons learned that we can carry forward when hosting a summit or a conference at this scale? Thank you.
Oh, well, Amitabh should answer most of that, but my lesson learnt was about your word, and excuse me, I'll mispronounce this, but jugaad. So I would arrive at these conference centres the night before, maybe even the morning the meeting was going to happen. There was someone still painstakingly putting flower petals on every, but on the day, it was always great. So for me, it was good.
Well, I gave you some of the challenges of negotiations, but the biggest, let me tell you this, the biggest challenge we faced throughout was that throughout the year, China opposed us on some of the basic principles on which we stood. They opposed Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. They said you cannot mention one earth, one family, one future, and Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam in the draft. They said, we'll not allow you to mention digital public infrastructure. They said, we'll not allow you to mention lifestyle for environment in the draft. We tried everything. Throughout the year, we failed. The last round, and that's important, that I built up a personal equationship with the Chinese Sherpa throughout the year. The last round I spent, every day I was spending 3 hours. And that shows that if you build up a personal relationship, a personal equation, you can cut across many things. And I was able to convince him on the second last day. And they agreed to everything we wanted. Everything that we wanted.
Last question, Mr. Pradeep Mehta. Here. Mike.
I'm Pradeep Mehta, and there's one very important supplement which I would like to make to what Amitabh spoke.
Closer to the...
Can you hear me?
Yes.
One very important supplement which is required for the audience to know, that when you're talking about taking the whole G20 regime to the people, more importantly, there was non-governmental participation very crucially, and with which Amitabh was also involved. Think Tank 20, Civil 20, and Business 20, and I was involved with all of them. So therefore, we were able to bring up bring up a lot of global opinion making, which then mattered as to how the progress would happen forward. Secondly, it was one important success in multilateralism, as against the failure that we saw in Jaipur on the trade aspect, the issue about dispute settlement. In spite of the fact that the trade ministers met in Jaipur, there was a strong statement made by
we are running out of time.
Our commerce minister that we require the dispute settlement system to be settled. Unfortunately, that was not carried in the declaration in that strong language as it was required. Thank you.
So, the engagement groups, Pradeep, played a key role. Think 20, Business 20, which Mr. Chandrasekhar of Tata Sons led. He did a remarkable job. All the business leaders played a key role. Community 20 played a key role. Youth 20 played a key role. All of them. And that is what made India's G20 a people's movement. And that is written about in the book. That it became a people's movement because of Youth 20, Think 20, Civil 20, and the Business 20. Of course, it did.
So please join me now in thanking Mr. Amitabh Kant, His Excellency Philip Green, Her Excellency May-Elin Stener, for their wonderful insights. They have helped us understand the challenges, triumphs, and lasting legacy of India's leadership of the G20. Thank you very much.